I warned Netanyahu that you people first attacked Palestine and Gaza, and now Qatar. But I warn you, if you attempt to cross Africa's borders, someone even more dangerous than us might emerge. We will not tolerate any action against our Muslim countries in any form.
In the rapidly changing political landscape of 2025, one story has shaken the foundations of global diplomacy. The confrontation between Burkina Faso's young revolutionary leader, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, and Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. What began as a sudden military strike on Qatar has now spiraled into one of the most unexpected and dramatic diplomatic showdowns of our time. At the center of it all is a bold ultimatum. Traoré's demand that Israel answer for its aggression within 48 hours, a move that stunned not only Netanyahu, but also the United Nations and the wider international community. To understand the gravity of this moment, we must look at the context. Qatar, a small but wealthy Gulf nation, has long played an outsized role in regional diplomacy. Known for its energy wealth and global influence, it has often positioned itself as a bridge between warring parties in the Middle East. But when Israel launched a controversial strike on Qatari soil, citing so-called security threats, the entire Arab world erupted in outrage. Qatar's sovereignty had been violated. Its people were left in fear, and its government demanded accountability. Yet in a world often divided by power politics, very few leaders dared to openly confront Israel. That changed when Ibrahim Traoré stepped into the arena. Known as the young captain who rose to power in Burkina Faso through a military-led transition, Traoré has rapidly emerged as one of the most outspoken voices for African sovereignty and independence. For him, the issue of justice in the Middle East was not just a matter of Arab solidarity. It was also about the dignity of oppressed nations, about rejecting what he calls the hypocrisy of global powers that preach peace while practicing domination. When news of the Qatar strike broke, Traoré wasted no time. Standing before cameras in Ouagadougou, he declared in fiery words that Africa would not remain silent in the face of injustice. He directly named Netanyahu, accusing him of reckless aggression and warning that Israel would face consequences if it did not halt its actions and issue a clear explanation within 48 hours. For many, it was shocking to hear an African leader speak with such directness against one of the most militarily powerful nations in the world. For others, it was inspiring. Proof that Africa was finally finding its collective voice. What made Traoré's statement even more powerful was its timing. Just days earlier, he had been in talks with other African heads of state about strengthening continental defense and building a united front against foreign interference. His words against Netanyahu were not just personal. They represented the growing anger across Africa and the Middle East. For decades, African nations have suffered under external control, resource exploitation, and political manipulation. To Traoré, Israel's actions against Qatar were not an isolated incident. They were part of a global pattern of disrespect towards smaller nations. The ultimatum quickly spread across international media. Headlines around the world highlighted the unprecedented move. Traoré confronts Netanyahu. A Burkina Faso issues 48-hour deadline. Africa speaks against Israel. Social media platforms exploded with debates. Supporters praised Traoré as a fearless defender of justice, while critics warned that he was overstepping and putting his small West African nation in the crosshairs of a geopolitical storm. But one thing was certain: his voice could not be ignored. At the United Nations, the atmosphere grew tense. Diplomatic representatives scrambled to respond to Traoré's challenge. The Qatari delegation welcomed his words, calling them a historic gesture of solidarity. Arab nations echoed the demand for accountability, while Western powers reacted with discomfort. The United States and several European allies, longtime backers of Israel, tried to downplay the ultimatum, describing it as inflammatory rhetoric. Yet the very fact that a young African leader had thrown down the gauntlet forced the UN to address the matter more seriously than it otherwise might have. Behind the scenes, Netanyahu and his cabinet faced mounting pressure. The strike on Qatar had already drawn criticism, but now Israel was facing an unusual new opponent, an African leader with nothing to lose and millions of people rallying behind his words. Some Israeli officials dismissed Traoré's warning as symbolic, arguing that Burkina Faso posed no real threat to their national security. But others cautioned that dismissing him would be a mistake. After all, Traoré had successfully built alliances across Africa, forging ties with Russia, China, and other global players who were eager to see Israel and its Western allies weakened. In Africa itself, Traoré's bold stand ignited a wave of pride. From Dakar to Nairobi, people took to the streets in solidarity with Qatar and in admiration of Burkina Faso's young leader. Commentators across African media described the ultimatum as a turning point, a moment when Africa was no longer a silent observer in global crises, but an active participant shaping the conversation. Yet the question remained, what exactly would Traoré do if Israel ignored his 48-hour deadline? Some speculated that he might call for sanctions. Others believed he could push for Israel to be barred from African markets and institutions. Still, there were those who suggested that his real weapon was not military, but moral. By speaking so openly, he had already succeeded in shifting the balance of narrative power. He had placed Israel under global scrutiny in a way that few other leaders had managed. As the hours ticked by, the world watched closely. In Tel Aviv, Netanyahu remained defiant, vowing that Israel would not bow to threats. In Ouagadougou, Traoré held his ground. The tension between a small West African nation and a global military power became symbolic of a much larger struggle. The fight between oppressed nations demanding justice and the entrenched powers that have long dominated the international system. The United Nations convened an emergency session to address the growing crisis. Heated debates filled the chamber as African, Arab, and Western diplomats clashed over the meaning of Traoré's ultimatum. Some argued it was reckless, others said it was visionary. But regardless of the outcome, one truth became undeniable. Traoré had forced the UN to confront an issue it might otherwise have ignored. His demand for accountability had put Qatar's suffering at the center of the global stage. Observers have noted that Traoré's move is part of a larger trend, the rise of a new generation of leaders in the global south who are no longer willing to play by the old rule. Whether in Africa, Latin America, or Asia, these leaders are challenging the dominance of traditional powers and asserting their own vision of justice and sovereignty. For many, Traoré has become the face of this movement, a young soldier turned president who dares to speak truth to power. Of course, the risks are enormous. Burkina Faso is a small, landlocked country with limited resources. Taking on Israel and its Western allies could expose it to economic retaliation, diplomatic isolation, or worse. Yet, Traoré seems undeterred. His supporters argue that his courage is precisely what makes him powerful. In a world dominated by fear, those who dare to speak out often capture the imagination of millions. As the 48-hour deadline approaches, speculation is at an all-time high. Will Netanyahu respond? Will Israel face new diplomatic challenges in Africa and beyond? And most importantly, will Traoré's ultimatum mark the beginning of a new era in international relations, one where the voices of smaller nations are no longer ignored? What is certain is that the confrontation between Ibrahim Traoré and Benjamin Netanyahu has already made history. In just a matter of days, a young African leader has shifted the global conversation, placed Israel on the defensive, and reminded the world that power is not only measured in weapons and wealth, but also in courage and conviction. The story is still unfolding, but one thing is clear. Whether or not Netanyahu bends to the pressure, Traoré has already won a moral victory. He's proven that Africa's voice can no longer be silenced, that justice can come from unexpected places, and that the fight for dignity knows no borders. In the end, this confrontation is bigger than Burkina Faso, bigger than Israel, and bigger than Qatar. It is about the future of global order. It is about whether smaller nations will continue to be trampled by the powerful, or whether a new era of equality and justice is finally dawning. And for now, all eyes remain fixed on that 48-hour clock, ticking loudly at the heart of international politics.